Hello everyone. My name is Fiona S Scho. I'm a novelist, game designer, and associate researcher at Regensburg University. And I figured uh, we're in Vienna. The Sigmund Freud Museum is about 500 meters that way, and apparently well worth a visit. I'll go later if anyone wants to come. Somebody should bring psychoanalysis into this, at least tangentially. So for the next half hour and change, I'll be rambling at you about questions like, why do people watch sports? Why do people watch streams? And why do people watch streams of very hectic games? And we'll spend a little bit of time working out the commonly theorized answers to these questions that have made it into general discourse before I will try to add yet another factor that I think ought to be at least considered when we're talking about something as complex of a phenomenon as why do people enjoy or take pleasure in the consumption of a particular piece of media. To that end, a quick caveat before we start. That is important to mention because I'll be speaking about activities that all of us here probably engage in to some extent. As with all things psychology, and especially social or mass psychology, we are very much working with the margins here. If you're looking for any kind of definitive or universally applicable answers, I don't have those for you. I'm sorry and welcome to the humanities. None of what I'm going to speak about here is necessarily going to be mutually exclusive, and none of what I'm saying is going to apply to everyone who hears it, but if I've done my job well enough, it will at least apply to a statistically significant portion of us. So with that out of the way, let's talk shop. Why do people watch sports? And fortunately, no one here is old enough to get that joke. While the majority of studies in the field, or at least the majority that I could turn up, are concerned specifically with what motivates people to attend live events in a stadium, and a lot of the prominent answers are fairly generic, like enjoyment of the game or entertainment. There are a few significant factors, especially among audiences watching from home, that bear relevance to what I'm looking to discuss here. The first is team loyalty. In a lot of the more popular sports, people are frequently born into support for their team, and people will support the same team or club through generations of players. Oftentimes, entire generations of a family unit can end up supporting the same team, and fan culture and fan club culture can become a constituent part of self-identification, even beyond identifying with the team that's actually on the pitch. Anyone who has ever tried to travel through Frankfurt or Mainz while Eintracht or Mainz 05 are playing knows what I'm talking about, and I'm sure many of you here are frequently reminded of the impact that local sports can have on the culture of an area. The second major factor that I'd like to highlight is just that cultural impact. Major sporting events are often global affairs whose sheer reach boggles the mind. The performance of a national team in a nationally popular sport is front page news that draws an immense amount of peripheral content. In Germany, whenever there's a Euro Cup or a World Cup, suddenly flags are appearing in every window and every other car, and every supermarket is running some kind of promotion. Nationally favored sports transcend the game themselves. They're discussed on the news, they're discussed in the papers. And as a very quick aside about the statistics that you can find quoted down there, I find it very interesting that cultural significance of an event was one of the highest predictors of viewership, specifically among the women that those studies surveyed, which, as someone who can care about soccer exactly once for a month every 4 years, extremely relatable. And thirdly, while those while those numbers are self-reported in surveys and therefore need to be taken with some grain of salt, it's worth pointing out with major sports that liking to watch the game is significantly linked to actually playing it, with surveys in the UK, 60 to 80% of people who watch a sport like soccer at least claim in surveys that they actually play it, at least on a casual level. But it is very much casual play. The vast majority of these players never engage in the ranked competitive aspects of soccer, as the barrier of entry to doing so is quite significant. You need to be young, you need to be athletic, and in all likelihood, you need to have started training bi-weekly at age 6. And all that before even getting into the actual talent for the sport or the physiognomic requirements that you are simply born with or not. Like, there isn't a lot of successful professional soccer goalies that are 5'3". On the other hand, why do people watch streams? Why do people watch other people play video games? Here too, there is a diverse set of reasons that viewers have reported and that various scholars have collected. And here too, a lot of the statistics are skewed by factors like excitement or release of tension, which, don't worry, we'll get to in due time. There are, however, two factors that I would like to highlight in particular. The first, incredibly commonly cited factor in interest in watching a video game stream is informational interest. And fair enough, in a day and age when we no longer print strategy guides, and in a day and age when is this game I bought on Steam actually a virus, is a valid question to ask. It can be useful to watch someone else play the game first to see where all the secret doors are, which traps to look out for, or if this game is going to empty your Bitcoin wallet. And especially in small to medium-sized streams, they are great for this sort of endeavor, because here, unlike when looking up a strategy guide on YouTube, it is very possible to actually engage with the streamer. It's actually possible to ask pointed questions. It's because these kind of streamers are likely to engage their viewership and share tips and tricks. And that leads to perhaps the most commonly discussed factor in why would you watch somebody else play the game for you, which is the social component. This usually takes one of two forms. One is community building. A lot of streamers will at least attempt to cultivate some degree of community within their fan base, and sometimes such organization spontaneously occurs from within the fan community and will often continue beyond the stream itself in Discord servers or subreddits or such. The t-shirt I'm wearing right now is from a streaming charity event, Desert Bus, that very much evolved out of a streaming comedy troupe from Canada, and which is a fan community so old it actually predates Twitch. Tune in this November 14th. On the other hand, there is the creation of the word that we see most commonly thrown around, parasocial relationships. Originally coined in the 50s to describe the emotions that viewers or listeners projected on movie stars or radio hosts, this term is now frequently used to describe the mechanics of emotional interaction between viewers and streamers. Regular viewers who watch the streamer day after day will begin seeing them as a friend, will begin to feel like they know them personally, Like there is a social bond that has been formed that isn't just a one-way street of passive viewership. And in some ways, that isn't far off. Unlike a lot of legacy media formats where the speaking celebrity remains an insurmountable distance away from the viewer, a lot of streaming formats have a very easy time engendering these kind of emotions. Um, After all, rather a lot of streamers regularly do interact with their audience, or at least address chat directly. And these streamers often feel a lot more like peers than they do celebrities. They might share anecdotes or insights from their lives, and their general demeanor and speech will, on average, be much more off the cuff rather than carefully curated, like the speech I'm failing to read to you right now, and a lot less filtered or restrained. So the viewer has an easier time feeling like they know who the streamer really is. And that's before we even get into formats like the ever popular IRL streams or the just chatting stream formats, where interaction is front and center, or where the streamer will take the audience quite literally to a location with them, and will oftentimes allow insight into the surroundings of their life and even bring their IRL friends into this as acquaintances or collaborators. And all of these trappings might make the content engaging or perhaps interesting to watch, but they also serve in a roundabout way to create those feelings of interpersonal intimacy with the streamer, which often enough end up tragically unreciprocated, that we describe as parasocial relationships. Now, why did I go on this 10-minute tangent? Because none of these factors that we've just described really apply to esports or to other high-performance streams like speedrunning or like fighting through very difficult games. Certainly not anywhere near this to the same extent. Let's look at that, shall we? While there's certainly some team loyalty in the esports sphere, esports are simply too young of a form of sports entertainment to have generational fandoms. It seems safe to say that we've yet to see someone be born into supporting Team Liquid. Very few people probably get together with their parents and grandparents to watch League Worlds. The police in Cologne does not roll out in force carrying machine guns because ESL is in town and they're worried about clashing fan clubs. Or that rival Counter-Strike teams might be planning a riot, at least outside of South Korea. But it goes further than that. Esports fan culture isn't just much younger, it's also much more disparate. Along a variety of axes. While there are some national teams in games like Overwatch, very few esports teams are truly local to a particular location, with the exception of a handful of universities or colleges sponsoring their own teams. And those are much more entwined with the culture of that particular institution than they are with the culture of an area or municipality. There is no regularly watching the home team in esports. Whatever fandoms have formed around esports also tend to be far more fractured. After all, they are united by shared interest, but often scattered around the globe. And this is also where the aforementioned parasocial relationships end up working against esports fan culture, because a lot of the time, it is not unusual for pro players to have their own streams on the side. And so the parasocial relationships will be formed with an individual streamer, not with a team. And that produces a very different kind of fan culture. legacy sports fandoms will frequently ostracize fans who follow a particular player around as fair weather fans. And those fans will be accused of disloyalty. They will be excluded from fandom spaces. They will be ostracized. Just ask any soccer fan who's of a club whose star players ended up at PSG. But in esports, the pay structures of a ton of leagues are so heavily structured toward tournament victory that pro players who actually want to make a living in this profession are encouraged to be very mercenary, because only victory matters to them and to their paycheck. And certain leagues, like for instance Rocket League, actually allows players, if 2 out of 3 players of a professional Rocket League team decide to hop teams, they get to take their rating with them. So there is very little to keep them from hopping to a different sponsor, to a different organization, if that suggests a slightly higher chance of victory, a slightly higher chance of a payday. So not only is this kind of team hopping fan behavior normal, it's borderline expected, since, like I said, a lot of viewers will have a parasocial relationship with a player rather than with a team. And also, such shifting loyalties are far easier logistically, because you just switch the Discord server as opposed to having to move out of Hamburg. And you are much less likely to encounter the same people you used to interact with than if you still drive past the Vereinsheim on your way to work every day. Yet, at the same time, with a few rare exceptions, the parasocial bonds and intimate engagement that viewers so easily form in small, cozy streams don't really apply here, or at least they are much harder to come by the more difficult or competitive the streamed play gets. Make no mistake, pro players, challenge streamers, speedrunners and the like are athletes of a sort. And with that fame come larger communities and fast scrolling, overflowing Twitch chats that make interacting with the individual viewers much harder and require a greater degree of personal discretion and distancing from the players themselves. A successful athlete playing at the highest level for fantastical cash prizes is also going to feel much less like a peer to most of us than someone who resembles us, hanging out and playing chill games. And with the athletic and competitive pursuit also comes a heightened pace and complexity of everything that's happening on screen, and a greater degree of focus that is required of the streamer, who does not have the same means or performs the same role in the greater Twitch ecosystem of frequently interacting with their chat. And they have a much higher pressure to perform consistently. After all, who watches a performance athlete to watch them lose a bunch? It's also this heightened complexity that draws the previously mentioned informational motivation for viewership into serious question. Quick show of hands, anyone here that doesn't play League of Legends, what is happening on screen? I've got no idea either. Exactly. But that's kind of the point. The higher the level of play, I've been given to understand that this is a World Championship winning play. I couldn't tell you. The higher the level of play on screen, the more confusing it will be to anyone trying to glean specifics, or the more regular viewership or prior knowledge about the intricate inner workings of a game is generally required to even work out what am I looking at, let alone draw something informative from it. High-level speedruns, esports sets, or competitive play is often borderline hermetic to the uninitiated. Now, that doesn't inherently rule out informational motivation. Perhaps all of the viewers are among the initiated. Perhaps the people who watch streams like this are all ranked or competitive players themselves who are looking to glean the current meta strategies or how to adapt and counter those very same tricks. And some of them certainly might be. Certainly compared to legacy sports, competitive gaming has an infinitely lower barrier of entry. Not to say that there isn't one, of course, particularly in terms of raw time investment required. Participation in the higher levels of modern video games can often be prohibitive, and there's certainly a level of reflexes or coordination required. But those requirements, both in training time and general accessibility, are more lenient than they are in sports played out on a rainy pitch. And while success is by no means guaranteed, skill-based match rankings notwithstanding, virtually any player can join the same match queue that a professional streamer will be playing in, very much in contrast to the casual soccer player who does not run the risk of playing against Manchester United if he does too well in a few matches in a row. And at the end of the day, as anyone who has ever tried to ladder in any game ever can contest, they do land absolutely anyone into Bronze 3. But unlike legacy sports, where, remember, significant majorities of regular viewers also reported that they play their chosen sport regularly, there's actually very little reason to make assumptions about how many of the thousands of viewers of an esports stream actually play that game. Indeed, as a very recent survey, this is from like September, has shown, viewership of a particular video game stream is actually not a statistically significant predictor on whether an individual actually plays that game, or has ever started it. And lastly, as much as we might care about a particular game, a particular league, or a particular team, we do have to acknowledge that the national or cultural significance of such events, no matter how impressive the displayed feats might be in context, very rarely gets evening news coverage and legacy media talk show attention, except for maybe this one. And there probably isn't a lot of viewers, once again, outside of South Korea, that are drawn to watching an Overwatch stream because of the national cultural importance. So then, with so many of the common motivators for watching both sports and regular streaming not really applicable, or where they are not nearly to the same extent, why do people watch esports and other highly complex or competitive types of play? The answer you'll find in the aforementioned statistics. It's entertaining. But let's get a bit deeper into the weeds, shall we, and ask what makes it entertaining. And to that end, allow me to go off on another tangent. In this day and age, a lot of the time, playing video games kind of sucks. And now that I've provided the YouTube thumbnail, please allow me to explain. The closest I have ever personally come to any kind of esports fame is some reasonably competitive EU progress rating in Star Wars: The Old Republic and scrubbing out of the round of 16 in the very first Smite Arena tournament organized by Alienware. All that to say, video games, especially competitive video games, are hard. And I am not good enough at video games to get into diamond ranks. Or to go to a big tournament, or to participate in virtually any competitive game that is played at the highest levels. Neither are lots of other people. I don't know how to beat Elden Ring in a way that looks halfway dignified, or does not involve copious amounts of meta cheese. Neither do most people. A lot of modern games are starting to feel like jobs. And I'm an untenured academic. I do not have the disposable leisure time to grind my daily quests in an MMO week after week. And to eventually have a tune that's geared up enough that I can commit yet more time to progress rating. Many other people don't either. I do not have the patience to learn the kit of Jesus Christ, at time of speaking, 171 different champions and all of these strategies on how to equip them, how to counter them. And I most certainly do not have the social fortitude to deal with the league chat and its trademark kindness toward minorities or people who keep losing their lane. But the good news is, if I want to know what platinum rank Rainbow Six Siege is like, or what a no-hit millennia kill looks like, I don't need to get good. I can just go and watch someone who is that skilled. Someone who has put in the hours of practice and grind, someone who has learned all the moves and has the reflexes to execute them perfectly. Someone who knows the boss's moveset in their sleep, someone who's got a 5-stack to play with and knows they can expect a little more coordination and less verbal abuse. And I can just have someone play these games for me. And I certainly can't speak for everyone, but if these hurdles were a major factor in determining how likely a game is to attract streaming views, the charts of the most popular games to stream would be dominated by games that are highly competitive, that have a high skill ceiling, that have notoriously toxic rank environments, or that require an immense investment of time to grind and to acquire the necessary knowledge and experience. And lo and behold, they do. So we might be on the right track to an answer here. Originally devised as and more or less popularized throughout the 90s by Robert Falla and Slavoj Žižek, interpassivity is a concept from contemporary psychoanalysis and by and large fairly under-discussed in game studies and related spaces, at least as far as I've been able to research, excluding this monograph from 2017, which focuses on pre-recorded and live stream content. So it's not plagiarism. So what is interpassivity? In the shortest possible summary, interpassivity is the theory of delegated enjoyment. The performance and consumption of a joyous, pleasurable activity is delegated to another, which can happen in a number of ways and for a number of reasons, though Falla and Žižek differ on this in some ways, with Žižek in particular being a lot more pessimistic about the level of self-deception that's involved in the process. But what does that mean in the concrete? A famous example that Robert Falla leverages a lot is the idea of canned laughter, where in a sitcom, a joke does not have to be funny and you do not have to laugh at the joke because the show will provide laughter from a can for you. Another example that Žižek, ever uncontroversial, likes to bring up is that of prayer wheels. That's these things. They have Buddhist prayers inside, and turning one is considered equivalent to reciting the prayer therein from a spiritual or religious point of view. And subsequently, Žižek argues this is interpassive participation in faith, praying instead in the worship, the role praying in the worshipper's stead. This concept is easily applied to traditional sports, like Matthias Fuchs does, for instance, when he suggests that the interpassive viewing of a soccer match can often include what he calls affect liaisons, all the way to active mimicry. And counterintuitively, he is not wrong to speak of modes of interaction here. For make no mistake, interpassivity is not passive in the sense of, say, Baudrillard's passive spectatorship. It is very much an active position, an act of delegation, though, as mentioned, theorists disagree to what extent it is a conscious decision. But both Žižek and Falla agree that interpassive consumption of a text, an activity, an ideology, or a cultural practice does constitute an activity of a sort. And Matthias Fuchs even makes the case in the aforementioned monograph that watching Let's Play videos might in itself constitute a different type of play. So Interpassive watching is an active endeavor and an act that allows the viewer to draw certain benefits both compared to not engaging, and critically, it also provides advantages over engaging with the activity actively. Some of these, as they pertain to our specific example of game streaming, we already discussed. Modern video games have a lot of aspects, be they antisocial like League Chat or tedious like the daily quest grind of World of Warcraft, or the dreaded crawl through silver in basically any competitive game, that aren't exactly fun to most players, and interpassively consuming those games lets you skip right to the good bits. But it's not just the cost for participation that is outsourced to be endured by somebody else. We've also already discussed the literal skill issues, though those are by no means the only barrier of entry for playing a particular game. There might also be potentially substantial financial or technological barriers. For instance, I do not own a PlayStation 4. To this day, the only way that I can consume Bloodborne is interpassively. And much more generally, it's worth remembering that though we here are statistically likely to have access to a PC or a home gaming system of some description, video games are still frequently expensive, and the platforms that run them even more so. So there are large parts of the world outside of Europe and North America that are at the mercy of regional pricing for their game-related purchases. And even in the wealthiest parts of the world, access to a machine that can keep up with the pursuit of graphic fidelity of modern flagship releases can be a tall ask. But beyond having someone else scale the barrier of entry and outsourcing the potential inconveniences of active participation, there are two more major benefits to the interpassive consumption of video games. The first is that interpassivity absolves the viewer of the duty to enjoy something. And there are a great many such compulsions or social pressures to enjoy a particular activity or belief in the modern world. We've already discussed how, for instance, nationally preferred sports hold immense cultural significance, both on a local and national level. And with such significance comes a social obligation to enjoy, for instance, in Europe, soccer, especially during major events, and enjoying the performance of the preferred home team, etc. And enjoying a game because of cultural obligation is a lot easier to do interpassively than by lacing up your shoes and going to stand on a pitch. And in a very similar vein, there exist a number of pressures and expectations to enjoy certain video games. I regularly overhear my students in school talk about the latest or most viral releases, and if everyone in your social group is talking about the upcoming Battlefield, that too creates a social compulsion to enjoy a game. And such a social group need not be immediate. It might be a Discord server, a subreddit, a particular circle of social media connections, or even a streamer community. And virality itself is a factor here. Certain games cycle through the zeitgeist and carried by chance or by flights of algorithmic fancy. And if the entire social media feed, as well as your preferred sources of content consumption, are full of a particular video game, that too creates a social compulsion to enjoy the consumption of that video game. And created by so many social situations that require its consumption to participate in. For example, currently, it is quite difficult to not feel at least a little compelled to play Battlefield 6 if you move in those kind of circles, just as other overlapping social stratas might have felt quite thoroughly compelled to consume Silksong in the past weeks. And if you don't feel comfortable giving money to Electronic Arts in light of the recent developments, or if you don't have a cutting-edge gaming system, or if you don't like Metroidvanias, or if you just can't stand insects, then you feel left out. And you feel left out of your Discord community of choice, the water cooler, blue sky, or the friend group on the schoolyard. And interpassivity, interpassively consuming these games, can be a substitute here. The second benefit lies in emotional regulation. I don't think I'll surprise anyone here if I say that video games are tremendously effective experiences. That sort of affect can take any number of forms and shapes, from choking up at an outstanding voice actor performance to getting startled by a monster jumping out of a closet, from feeling triumph when finally overcoming a particular difficult boss or winning a hard-fought match, to the anger of the 27th rate wipe in a row, or losing a match because your tank refuses to switch off of Roadhog, all the way to the physical adrenaline jitters you feel when things are down to the wire and you clutch a 3v1 in Rainbow Six Siege. Now, when we interpassively consume a game, when we watch someone else go through these scenarios, these emotions are still felt. There is still a feeling of tension watching your team compete at the highest level, a feeling of triumph when they succeed, a feeling of frustration when they lose. There is a sense of relief, of tension and joy watching a streamer finally overcome a boss fight after an hour of struggle. There's a sense of tension and maybe even dread watching a streamer manage access to the night watchman's cubicle. But all of these emotions are lessened, flattened out compared to the real thing. The peaks are lower, but the valleys are much higher. And sure, that means the sense of accomplishment that coming from beating Millennia yourself is more intense than the sense of accomplishment that comes from watching him solo her. But it comes at a hell of a lot less investment of emotion, time, and effort. And perhaps most importantly, it comes with a lot less emotional risk. Because watching somebody else lose does not bear near as bad a sting as giving your all and losing yourself. Watching somebody else navigate the streets of Silent Hill is not nearly as nerve-wracking as doing it yourself, and with a much smaller investment comes a greater distance that serves to mitigate all the negative emotions that one necessarily risks when engaging with a game that is very scary, frustrating, competitive, tedious, or just plain difficult. Now, at the end of all of this, there are, which we're almost at, don't worry, there are two questions I would like to address with something that will hopefully feel a little bit like a conclusion. Is watching streams into passive consumption? And is that a bad thing? Now, the first question I think is fair to answer in the affirmative. Both Zizek and Fallis models describe the emotional patterns of the dispositive of a game stream, and it seems difficult to imagine a more clear-cut example of interpassive consumption than, well, quite literally outsourcing the consumption of the piece of media to somebody else and watching them do it. So while certainly each individual's viewing habits might be complex and informed by a variety of motivations, when we ask questions like, why do people watch streams, or why do people watch esports, the benefits of interpassive media consumption, I think, ought to be considered a lot more in the scholarly discourse than they currently are, especially when we undertake to publish research that tries to gain a deeper understanding of how streaming works and what it does with the viewer. And now it gets dicey. Because I don't know about you all, but when I first came into contact with it, when I first started to thinking about the things I watch on Twitch, I felt a certain reluctance I had to overcome. The thought that I've outsourced my own free time entertainment to somebody else who's better than at video games than me is not a flattering thought. So this question does need to be asked. Is this a bad thing? Because both Robert Faller and especially Slavoj Žižek are terribly pessimistic about interpassive consumption, not just when it comes to the interpassive consumption of things like religion or ideology, or because of the risks that Mark Fisher describes regarding the effects of interpassive consumption of subsumed activist media, all of which I've not even begun to touch upon. There is a lot of text on this subject. But because under a capitalist mode of economics, all consumer choices have a political dimension, especially the choice of a type of consumption that has been preemptively defanged, rendered safer, made particularly attractive to the risk averse, to those who don't want their entertainment to be too much effort or too intense, lest it provide any kind of disruption. And yes, the choice to watch somebody stream some video games has a political dimension, even when the streamers in question have somehow managed to evade controversy. There's a wonderful quote from Moroccan filmmaker Med Hondo that I try to get into as many slides as humanly possible, and that, while originally written about cinema specifically, remains ever prescient when discussing any kind of entertainment that appears absent political messaging. We are not involved in politics is only a lie and dishonesty, flight into a dream world, silence and everything troublesome, an evasion which gives a clear field to the forces of stagnation and subjugation. It is a political game because it works to the advantage of existing capitalist structures. And interpassivity exaggerates that effect, strips away or dilutes whatever effective intent of a piece of media might have had, makes the consumption for the sake of consumption or for the sake of satisfying artificially manufactured compulsions all that much easier. Now, is that to say that the interpassive nature makes watching any kind of game stream a sin, that to engage in any kind of interpassive consumption constitutes a failure of civic duty? Zizek certainly appears to suggest as much, but I cannot answer that question for you. What I can tell you is this. In this increasingly hellish world we are all forced to live in, building and maintaining resilience through self-care is praxis in of itself. So I'll leave you with this. Find your joy where you can, no matter if that may be active, passive, or interpassive media consumption. But do try to make that choice informed and choose your preferred mode deliberately. And do be kind to yourself and to one another. Now, if you want to do the social media thing, this is where you can find me, and thank you for your time.